Hey everybody, it's Jade with Metabolic Effect, and today I wanted to cover a question that we get an awful lot here at Metabolic Effect, specifically for the women. One of the things that happens is many women are using oral contraceptive therapies or hormone replacement therapies that are, really designed to help them deal with hormonal issues or just keep from getting pregnant or dealing with menopause. There's a lot of reasons why women will go on these hormones, and one of the things that happens is frequently these things come along with weight gain and fat gain. So a lot of women are wondering, what's this all about? What is going on with these hormones that is creating this fat gain? Here's the thing to understand about the female hormones estrogen and progesterone. First, I want to cover for you just briefly what they do alone by themselves. Now, of course, that's a very dangerous thing when you're talking about hormones, because hormones never work by themselves. But let me just tell you, the action of estrogen in general, when it's all by itself, is really as a fat burning hormone. And that oftentimes shocks people because they think it's actually fat storing. It really is not. In other words, estrogen interacting by itself is fat burning because of what it does to lipoprotein lipase. That's the major fat storing enzyme, which insulin enhances lipoprotein lipase, and that's why insulin is fat storing. Estrogen does the reverse to lipoprotein lipase. Progesterone is actually more fat storing, and it is very much the opposite in terms of what it does to lipoprotein lipase. So estrogen is fat burning in general. Progesterone is fat storing in general when they are looked at by themselves. However, like we talked about before, these hormones can never be looked at in isolation because they impact all other hormones. Think of hormones like you do people. We behave differently depending on what social environment we're in and who we're socializing with. Hormones act the same way. So let's take estrogen. One of the things that estrogen does that is important is it interferes with thyroid hormone. Now your eyebrows are probably going up because we all know thyroid is a major metabolic hormone. It, along with the adrenal glands, really the adrenaline and noradrenaline, these catecholamines, are really our fat burning engines. And so too much estrogen will interfere with thyroid. This is one of the reasons why women have larger thyroids than men, because of this estrogen effect. So in that regard, estrogen slows fat loss to some degree. And progesterone is really interesting because progesterone is anti-cortisol. It has some anti-cortisol effects. So progesterone, although it is directly fat storing, it inhibits fat storing because one of the things it does is decrease the impact of cortisol around the belly. So estrogen and progesterone together, what they do is they result in the feminine look, the hourglass shape, small waist, a little bit bigger hips and thighs. That is what they do when they're combined with all these other hormones. But when you put extra estrogens primarily into the body, you have to remember these estrogens that you're getting in these drugs are not bioidentical estrogens. These are usually horse estrogens that are much more potent than the estrogens that we make in our body. And so when you have that happen, two things primarily go on. One thing is fairly controversial, not a whole lot of doctors talk about it, but any hormone that you get too much of, your body will down-regulate the receptors for that hormone. So very strong estrogen, a lot of estrogen, will result in estrogen resistance on many cells in many different tissues. Not all tissues, but some. And so what you end up with is having less of this direct fat-burning response from estrogen because you're becoming estrogen resistant from these very strong estrogens in the body. This can happen also naturally because as our estrogens detoxify in our livers, they also can make stronger estrogens when that happens, and that also can have an impact. So not only is estrogen resistance an issue, but the other thing with estrogen is these strong estrogens drastically impair thyroid function. So what they do is they inhibit thyroid function and can put you in a hypothyroid state, shutting down your metabolic engine to some degree. With progesterones that are in these formulations, it's the same thing. These things are progestins. They're much stronger than the regular progesterone that we would make in our body. And what happens is usually these hormonal therapies are higher in estrogen relative to the progestins. Usually, not always the case. It depends on the particular drug. But oftentimes what happens is not only do we get a situation where we have this excess, very strong estrogen going on that's interfering with the estrogen receptors and interfering with thyroid, but we have this imbalance of estrogen and progesterone going on as well, so we get more of these stress effects, more of these cortisol effects. When you think estrogen, you want to think anti-insulin when it's in the bioidentical form and how we make it in our body. And when you think progesterone, you want to think anti-cortisol. Now all of a sudden you got these very strong estrogens that are interrupting estrogen physiology because of estrogen resistance and interrupting thyroid physiology because of this hypothyroid issue. And this is why oftentimes you'll get this situation where you start taking on a hypothyroid look, looking like you're very puffy, holding a lot of water, those kinds of things. And then with the progesterone issue, the other issue with progesterone is that women who are under high stress, there is something that goes on in the adrenal glands called pregnenolone steal. Now that's something we haven't talked about yet, but pregnenolone is what we call the mother hormone. It makes progesterone in the adrenal glands. Many alternative practitioners like myself believe that when a woman is under high stress, they are effectively reducing their ability to make progesterone, because pregnenolone and progesterone can also be made to use or be used to make cortisol in the adrenal glands. And this becomes an issue mainly for menopausal women versus younger women who are still making enough progesterone in the ovaries. But that is the major issue. Now I know that's a big, complicated way of talking about this, but it really is two things: too much estrogen effects causing hypothyroid issues and estrogen resistance, and this progesterone effect that is causing a estrogen progesterone potential dominance, and that meaning you're estrogen dominant relative to progesterone, creating this whole spiral impacting thyroid, impacting adrenals, and impacting your ability to burn fat. So you might say, well, what is the fix then? Well, of course, not all of us can go off the oral contraceptives. Not all of us can go off these hormone replacement therapies. But what we do is we try to do everything we can to detoxify estrogens correctly in the liver. So there's many different herbs and things that you can use to do that, especially increasing your intake of the cruciferous vegetables, broccolis, cauliflowers, kale, kohlrabi, those kinds of things. Taking supplements such as diindolylmethane or DIM, saw palmetto extract, and things like nettles and EGCG from green tea. All these things can help balance the estrogen in the body. In addition to getting rid of these exogenous estrogens, trying to get off these drugs if at all possible and work with your own bioidentical hormones through supplements and herbs and things like that first, if possible. And then with progesterone, it's the same kind of thing. We really want to see what we can do about lowering the excess of stress response of cortisol, which can have a negative progesterone effect. And that has an awful lot to do with using things like rhodiola and adaptogenic herbs like ginsengs, phosphatidylserine, and things like that. And also making sure we get plenty of fiber and burn fat. Fiber will help the enterohepatic circulation of estrogen. It'll slow that down so that we don't reabsorb estrogens when the body's getting rid of them. And also, when we think about the fiber piece, we want to think about, of course, that's going to have an effect on keeping us hungry or keeping us not hungry, balancing cravings, stabilizing energy levels so that we can burn fat. And the more you burn fat, the less estrogen exposure you have, because what many people do not know is fat cells have an enzyme called aromatase, which can make estrogen. And so losing weight in general is a better way to deal with that. So that's a big, complicated message to what seems like a pretty simple question, but there's really a lot to understand with this. So hopefully that is helpful for you and gives you some ideas about what you might be dealing with hormone replacement therapies.